We have all kinds of NHL news and rumor updates to talk about in today's video, including several RFA updates that are remaining unsigned. We get the latest on Lucas Raymond, Dawson Mercer, Jeremy Swayman. Is he looking for some big money? We get the latest on that situation, plus Seth Jarvis as well. Leon Draisaitl and the Oilers, where do things stand on his contract extension? Plus some coaching updates from teams like Nashville and Vancouver. Some very interesting comments from the Russian coach of Habs prospect Ivan Demidov, and some trade talk as well around the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Minnesota Wild. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to talk about here today. Let's kick things off with a bunch of updates regarding some restricted free agents that are still unsigned. We're getting pretty late now into August, and we're less than a month away from training camp in most markets. And while at this point, a lot of fan bases are starting to get a little antsy for some of these contracts to get done and get some of their favorite players and top young stars, make sure they're not on missing any time and they're on the ice for training camp. I mean, obviously, we still have a little ways to go. Like I mentioned before numerous times, usually most players will be signed by the time we hit training camp. There sometimes is one or two that tends to lag on and maybe miss a little bit of time, but the bulk of these will probably be done. Once we hit a pressure point of camp starting or the season starting, you usually tend to see both sides making a little bit more concessions to kind of get things done and show a little bit more urgency. But Dave Pagnotta today gave us an update on several RFAs. Now, there's not every RFA across the market here that he had updates on. Some he didn't have any new intel. But in Detroit, Lucas Raymond in Detroit apparently are nowhere close to a contract. That's certainly not good news. He didn't mention anything about RFA defenseman Mo Seider. We kind of suspected that Raymond and Seider's contracts would both be long-term, and they'd both be similar, probably with Seider getting a little bit more money. But, at the end of the day, the fact that they're not close is definitely concerning. We know Steve Yzerman can notoriously be a pretty tough negotiator, so we'll see if they get things done. He did mention, on the other RFA that the Red Wings have, Jonathan Berggren, that there was a lot more optimism that he would definitely have a contract in place before training camp gets underway. Now, another RFA forward that apparently is nowhere close to a contract is Dawson Mercer of the New Jersey Devils. Now, of course, we don't know the exact asking price of any of these guys, but, Mercer and the Devils not being close, certainly not a good sign. But like we said before, no pressure points yet. Not going to panic for Devils fans, but, certainly he's been a very good player for them. He has not missed a game yet in his NHL career. 3 seasons to complete his rookie contract, played all 82 every time, been very productive, very versatile. I think he can command a good amount of money. Maybe, in this case, he could be asking for more money than what they have in cap space, which I don't know if that's really be the case. I mean, where the Devils sit, I think they should be able to squeeze him in without too much trouble, but we'll see. But at this point, things are not close, nothing imminent at all there. Seth Jarvis, on the other hand, in Carolina, as I mentioned before, from Elliot Friedman's intel the other day, Pagnotta saying similar type of stuff here, that essentially he feels that Jarvis and the Canes are close. He feels that they're likely going to close in here on a 7 to 8 year contract, somewhere around that $7.5 million or so dollars. So, I mentioned before, it could be 8 times 8, maybe a little bit less. That's kind of the feeling that a lot of people had earlier, and it's still trending to be the case here. But Jarvis and the Canes much closer than Raymond or Mercer, according to these latest reports. The big rumor today that surprised a lot of people was around the Boston Bruins and goaltender Jeremy Swayman. Now, we know that there's different reports out there, but the one that caught a lot of people by surprise was some saying that the intel was suggesting that Swayman was looking for a contract in the $10 million range. That's a lot of dinero. But from the info from Pagnotta, he said that both sides were showing confidence that a deal would be done by the time camp hits. That's really all he had to say. He didn't really comment on the, how far apart they might be today. But the impression he's getting is that they're confident. But that's not unusual either, right? You would think both the team and the player would be confident that whatever gaps exist, they'll get them closed and they'll figure it out. But you got to remember with Swayman, I would not be shocked to find out that the $10 million ask is legit. Maybe because we had heard before it was going to be upwards around 9. So it's really not that much more than what the most recently rumored amount was. Like I said, hard to say exactly what the case is here. Either way, even if it's not 10, it's fair to say he is looking for some big money, which explains why it's taken this long and why they're not together on a deal here just yet. But the other thing you got to remember with Jeremy Swayman as his agent is Louis Gross. I've talked about Louis Gross a lot on his channel as being one of the most notorious agents around the game of hockey that really drags out negotiations. He's one of the hardest guys to deal with, and a lot of his players have really either held out or drug on negotiations so that they either missed a little bit of time, a lot of time, or in the case of William Nylander back a long time ago when his first deal out of his ELC with the Leafs, almost missed the season. He signed at the 11th hour in December 1st when the cutoff was that if he didn't sign that day, he was going to miss the rest of the year. That was a really long, drawn-out negotiation. But Johnny Gaudreau, he represents him. Gaudreau, back in his Calgary days, had a really long, drawn-out, tenacious negotiation. Nylander, like I just mentioned. A couple more recent ones that were not as drawn-out, but still were longer than I think needed to be. Rasmus Sandin missed a little bit of training camp with the Maple Leafs back a couple of years ago. Shane Pinto, most recently over the course of last year and this year. Of course, Pinto ended up suspended, which kind of changed that whole dynamic, but things were progressing to the point that it wasn't looking promising. And this year, they wanted to do a long-term deal, and they could not come to an agreement. Finally, they got a 2-year deal done. I'm not sure exactly what ended the kind of stalemate there, but he's notorious for driving a hard bargain. So I'm not saying Jeremy Swayman's going to miss time or that he's going to be holding out past the start of the season. It's just with this agent, it wouldn't be shocking. I hope for Bruins fans' sake that that's not the case. That would have a major impact on their outcome of their season, I think. Yes, they've made a deal. They don't have Allmark anymore. They have Jonas Korpisalo. If they have to rely on him and he plays like he did in Ottawa last year, it's not going to go well. So it's just, at the end of the day, I know Swayman loves being a Bruin. I don't think this is going to lead to a change of scenery, a trade. We don't have any reason to suggest that here just yet, and that's very premature. But there's no pressure points. But we're far enough along into the season and off season that it's starting to get a little bit concerning. And if a few more weeks go by, and the reports are that he wants $10 million and they're nowhere close, that's going to be a big gap to bridge, and will they get there is the big question. So again, it's just a rumor. Doesn't mean that it's 100% accurate. I think it's fair to say that there is a big gap or we'd have a deal. I think it's fair to say that he's looking for big money or we'd probably have a deal. But like I said, between his asking price, what the agent's looking for, the agent's reputation, I would not be shocked if this at the very least goes into the beginning of camp. So yeah, if I'm a Boston fan, I'm mildly concerned. And if we get to camp without anything, then I'm going to be, increasing that level of concern a little bit every day. Now, on the Leon Draisaitl front, of course, he's one of the big names, not the only one by any means, but one of the big names out there looking for a contract extension. Word is he'll be arriving back in Edmonton sometime this week, and it's expected that talks will kind of intensify a little bit with he and Stan Bowen and Leon's agent. But the 2 Months podcast, who we've been kind of referencing for some intel on the Oilers situation with a variety of things this offseason when it comes to the offer sheets and Cody Ceci being traded and a few other things that they've been pretty good with their intel on. They're suggesting right now that Leon's likely looking at a contract, $13.5 million over 8 years. It's believed that Leon, Connor, Bouchard have all, like I said, agreed to not try to maximize their full market value, take a little bit less to stay in Edmonton long term and try to win together, and that they're trying to foster the kind of a whole team mentality. If everybody kind of takes that approach and doesn't max out their full everything, then there'll be a stronger team because of it. So we'll see. But right now, that's the latest intel on Leon, is at around $13.5 million over 8 years. And to be honest, I think that would be a good contract, and I can see that being pretty close to what it ends up when the Oilers and him finally come to terms. Now, because I mentioned a couple other quick updates before we jump in to some other intel here, but some coaching updates. The Nashville Predators today have hired Matt Donovan. Of course, he's a former pro player. Donovan is going to be an assistant coach for AHL Milwaukee. He played 14 pro seasons. He's now 34 years old. Last played the NHL back in 18-19, and that was for Nashville when he was still a part of their organization. So he comes back to them as an assistant coach for the AHL. Nashville also announced today that longtime GM David Poile is going to be inducted as their inaugural member of what they're calling the Preds Golden Hall, which would be something that they're going to celebrate and launch on January the 16th. Update in Vancouver as well. We know that they've had some changes to the goaltending situation with Ian Clark moving along. And of course, their Abbotsford coach kind of taking over in Vancouver. They needed a new goalie coach for the AHL Canucks in Abbotsford. And that's going to be Justin Pogge, former NHL goalie himself, has been hired by the Canucks for that role. So some coaching updates there. Some interesting comments as well from one of the Habs' top prospects and number 5 overall pick from the 24th draft, Ivan Demidov. Of course, there's been lots of debate on where he's going to fit into his Russian team in the KHL's lineup this year. You know, I've seen some Habs fans talking online as if he, you know, is there a chance he could get cut and go down to the lower level below the KHL? Is there a chance he would be maybe loaned to another team like we saw with Matvei Michkov last year? Or what have you, and if that's the case, if any of those scenarios happen, could he end up in Montreal sooner? And to be honest, I think the answer is probably not. I don't see those scenarios happening, but his Russian coach, Roman Rottenberg of the SKA, made some interesting comments, and I'll link the article down below. Keep in mind, this is all through Google Translate, so it may not be perfect, but essentially what he says is that Ivan Demidov should not go to the NHL until he's completely ready. Of course, his contract in the KHL does not expire until June of 2025. So he would be spending this entire season there, and then next summer, before the NHL hits their July 1 free agency period, would be around that time when his Russian contract would be up and he could officially sign in Montreal for the season after. So essentially, it says that there's no point in him playing fourth line minutes in the NHL or in the American Hockey League, he says, where they can break your arms and legs. So obviously this coach is not fond of the American Hockey League. And yes, it is a different style of game, and it can get pretty physical and pretty rough at times. But that's certainly part of the North American game more so than it is the European game. But it sounds like he really is firmly set on Demidov staying with their team, and he says like he'll fully support him making the jump to the NHL when he can be a top line contributor. They had similar comments around Matvei Michkov as well. So would Demidov be able to play Montreal's top line next year? I don't know about top line, but could definitely play in the top 6. I think that's probably pretty fair. So hard to say exactly, when he comes, but right now with his contract expiring after the end of the season next summer, and based on these comments, I think it's pretty likely that Demidov will get a decent role with SKA and likely spend a year there and make the jump to Montreal next year. But certainly some interesting comments I got a kick out of, especially on the breaking the arms and legs, playing in the American Hockey League. Now, as I mentioned on the trade rumor front, and we're going to take a look at Minnesota and Pittsburgh. With Minnesota, it's just a quick update as well. I saw an Athletic article from Joe Smith and Shayna Goldman talking about the Minnesota Wild and the fact that Philip Gustafsson has been in the rumor mill really since the season ended. But right now, it seems to be like it's more likely that they've kind of changed course on trading Gus, and he's probably going to remain with the team. Obviously, after thinking things through and looking at the fact that Fleury is, 40 years old and playing his last season. Jesper Wallstedt is certainly somebody that they would like to see get some NHL time. He's put in lots of time in the American Hockey League, but of course, doesn't have a lot of experience and stuff. So between Fleury's, age and his lack of experience, Gustafsson's kind of in the middle here. And this seems like, if they can kind of make the 3 goalie system work for another year with Wallstead putting in a little bit more time in the AHL if need be, that next year they can move forward with Gustafsson and Wallstead if everything's still going the plan here. And of course, that's assuming Gustafsson continues to play well and, is somebody that the Wild would still like to have around. But even though he was mentioned a lot in trade rumors, this last article here in The Athletic kind of suggests that at this point it doesn't look like he's going to move. But of course, things could be maybe reevaluated later on depending on how his play goes. Now, in Pittsburgh, of course, we still don't have a Sidney Crosby contract. Still getting lots of people talking. The more this drags on, the bigger story it's going to become. There's just no doubt about that. And just kind of revisiting some other Penguin articles, just looking back here at some of the comments, you got to wonder if the dragging on of Crosby, because the more this kind of goes on, like I said, it's going to become a bigger story. People are going to speculate more. Why is this not done? It should be so easy. And, as we kind of review what all of the different Pittsburgh media members have said over the past week or two as they've published their most recent articles, it's kind of become clear that maybe Kyle Dubas, I don't think this has anything to do with Crosby himself, but it seems like Dubas would like to probably make more changes than Crosby or some of the veterans on the team would like to see. Josh Yohe of the Athletic, in his recent article, which was a while back, I know when we talked about, because I'm not sure when it was probably a week and a half ago, sometime in the past 2 weeks, I can't remember what day it was, we talked about, there was some rumors that were floating around about Chris Letang, and that he had requested maybe being traded to Montreal, and that Letang's agent and Dubas, and that they had talked about it, and they talked to Montreal, but they never came to terms, obviously, because the trade never happened. But that Montreal, I think they had some level of interest, but not enough to really put the effort in to get the deal done. Not so much that they don't like the player, but it just doesn't really fit with where things are at in their rebuild. So there was that rumor that was floating around. And it just kind of went from there, essentially. And I mentioned that there was also rumors around Malkin, and that after the season, he might go to Russia. He's signed for 2 more years, but there's some talk that he may not stick around for the second year. And I just kind of wondered if all this might be impacting Crosby's decision. And if you look back at the Josh Yohe article, he even mentioned that he really thinks that that Dubas would like to move on. It's not just a case of Letang wanting to go to Montreal. We can't verify that that's 100% true, but that was the rumor. But he believes that Dubas would like to move him, and that if he could, find ways to move on from him and Malkin, that he would. But of course, that's not going to go sit well with Crosby. And I just kind of wonder if internally there might be some philosophical battles going on, which might be impacting some decisions being made. I really honestly wonder, and that's just me wondering. I don't have any intel on that. But knowing that, Dubas is clearly trying to make this team younger. They've been accumulating more younger talent, trying to get some more draft capital, trying to, turn this team over a bit. Crosby's not signed an extension, so you wonder what's going on there. It should be super easy. And then, then we hear one of the more prominent Pittsburgh media members a few weeks ago say that he really thinks that if Dubas could, that he would move Malkin and Letang. So it just makes you wonder what is all going on in the land of the Penguins here, and if there really is more internal debate on direction and what have you with this team. I do wonder if this could be the final year, almost like a last dance for these guys. If Letang really does want to be traded, and if Malkin really does want to go back to Russia, and if Sid's having second thoughts about extending his contract, could this be the final hurrah for all three in Pittsburgh this year? It does make you wonder. I mean, moving Letang would be challenging, given his history, the contract, and everything like that. But, Letang and Malkin are still productive for their age. But they are up there in age. So having them around doesn't really seem to align with Dubas' vision. It's kind of what the article suggests. And that they're still productive enough that they'd get really good value if they did trade them. So it's kind of hard to say, right? Obviously, moving these guys. I wonder because right now, a lot of people would say the Penguins are going to have a hard time being a playoff team this year. They have missed the past couple of years, and yes, they've made some changes this year. They did get a little bit younger, but are they better enough to get into playoffs? Look at how much improvements we've seen in other teams and some of the other emerging teams in the Atlantic. It's going to be a battle, and it's going to be really tough. And if they get down to, like say we're approaching February, and there's like only a few weeks to go, and it's not looking promising for the Penguins, are we going to see a shift in direction here? And would they have conversation? Like, could these guys be the biggest names on the market for the trade deadline? It really makes you wonder. I mean, I don't have any intel to suggest that we're at that point or that's what Dubas is thinking. It's just the longer this drags out, like I said, the bigger story it becomes, and it just really starts to make you question everything. And then when you see, all the articles over the past couple of weeks, kind of, hinting around, it's a lot of people just don't, even the most plugged-in writers for the Penguins don't seem to know what's going on with Crosby. And then when you hear them saying the comments about Malkin and Letang, it's just like, maybe there's a connection here. So let me know what you think. Is this going to be the last hurrah for the Penguins as is? Are the rumors that are floating around Letang and Malkin maybe more truth to them than we wanted to believe a few weeks ago? And is it impacting Crosby's decision, which is why we don't have a deal yet? Let me know what you think down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.